Hey, what's up guys? It's Lucas and welcome back to Fine Tuning. So this is going to be the first part in a series about how to do your own kind of DIY relic job. And I realized that relic jobs on guitars can be a little divisive. People that don't like them really don't like them and they just feel like they need to tell you. Like vegans. Sorry, vegans. If you like relic guitars and you think that's a cool thing and you'd like to learn how to do it yourself, then this is going to be a series that you're going to want to check out. If you just absolutely hate the idea of relic guitars and you think it's for posers and whatever, you know, then just don't even watch this. One of the things that I see in comments and stuff all the time is people will say, this is usually the people that don't like relics, they'll say, oh, just throw it behind a truck and drag it, or just like go throw it on some gravel, or just, you know, hit it with a hammer or something like that. And that, like, I get what you're saying, but that's not true at all. So to make a relic job that looks good, to do a good, convincing, aging job on a guitar, there's a lot that goes into it, and it's a very particular process, and there's different ways to go about different things. Some guitars are better candidates than others, and we're going to address all of that stuff in this series. I don't know how many parts this is going to be, but it's going to be several parts because I'm going to really in-depth break it down into sections. So with that in mind, when you're choosing the guitar that you want to do the relic job on, in my opinion, you want to go for a guitar that could conceivably be old enough in design, in the way that it's built and the way that it looks, the kind of guitar that you would see a relic version of. So what I mean is, if it's one of these like, you know, super shredder looking guitars, you know, it's maybe not going to look as convincing. Do whatever you want. This process will apply to everything. But I think if you want to do a good relic job, you probably want to go with a vintage style guitar. Also, if this is your first relic job, then I would recommend probably doing this on a very inexpensive guitar. Maybe you might call it like a donor guitar, so that you can kind of hone the process and learn the techniques and everything. So if you mess up, it won't be a huge deal. In that interest, the guitar that we're going to use is this. So this is a Squier Bullet Mustang. So this is a very, very inexpensive guitar. This was purchased from Sweetwater. These are about $150, which is, of course, extremely inexpensive. But this is a good candidate for a number of reasons. One, this is a vintage-looking guitar. All right, now it looks new because it is new, but the design itself, the way the body is shaped, the big kind of headstock, just this sort of aesthetic is very like 60s looking. And because these came out, I think, in maybe 64 or something. So this is going to be the guitar that we use because I think this will make for a moderately believable relic. Now I realize that this is not going to be like exactly the way that Mustangs were because it doesn't have the right pickups and it doesn't have the bridge and all, you know, we're taking a little bit of artistic liberty here, but this should, in theory, be a pretty good candidate. So, since we're going to do a Mustang, and there are actual real Mustang relics, like old Mustangs, one of the things I like to do when I'm getting ready to do a relic guitar is do some research. Okay, so when I say research, I went to school for theater, and one of the things that we had to do when we were doing like scenic design for a play was you would kind of get an idea of what you wanted to do, and then you would do research. You would find images of things that kind of evoked the look you were going for, and you could use those as source material. So when I say source material, from this point on, this is what I'm talking about. So what I've done is, before we did this, or before I started shooting, I went and collected some photos just off Google Images of some actual old Fender Mustangs. So let me just open up my folder here. And what we're going to do is just look through some of these photos, and I'm going to point out some things, and then we'll kind of take that in stride and use those going forward. So this whole video is going to be kind of just the pre-production, I guess, if you want to call it that. So let's take a look at this first one here. So you'll have to forgive me, the camera's right in front of my computer screen, but anyway, here is a picture of an actual old Mustang headstock. So now you see how that wood has kind of got, the grain is showing, you can kind of see some of the headstock logo there has kind of got some pieces missing and stuff like that. But it's overall, it's in pretty good shape to be from, I think this one is probably from a, you know, a mid-60s Mustang. But one thing that I think is important to notice here is that this wood is not that kind of vintage amber tint that like old Strats have, like old 50 Strats, because I think by this point they were using poly finish and it wasn't tinted. So that neck on the Mustang that we have is what I would call the bleach white look. So, you know, it's very white. And you can put clear coat on that and it will kind of give it a little bit of a color, but not too much. So we'll probably have to do something to make it tint just a little bit to kind of make it look a little older, but you don't want to go too much, and I wouldn't recommend using like, you know, some kind of like tinted lacquer or something like that, because it wouldn't look correct, I don't think. Now, there's some other pictures that are going to contradict that a little bit, but we'll move on to those. So that's an important thing to notice here, is the tone of the wood. Here's another great example. I believe this is that same guitar. So you can see down here in the corner, right here, there's some finish missing. All right. That is a good note because that finish is missing in a very particular area. It's missing right where the arm would ride on the guitar. And so that is important to note, that when you take finish off, you know, it's one thing to age the finish, but when you start taking finish off and chipping it off, you want to do it in an area that would be like what I would call like a high traffic area. So that's important to note, that when we do remove finish, we want to do it only in places where it makes sense for the finish to be missing. Another thing to note here, check out this bridge. Now the bridge itself is not really that corroded looking. Like the plate of the bridge is not really that corroded looking, because that's not direct contact with hand, oil, stuff like that from your skin. So it's pretty chrome looking. I mean, it's kind of aged a little bit, and we'll kind of, you know, dull it up a little bit and add some like kind of swirls and stuff, so, you know, make it look like it's been maybe taken apart once or twice. But it doesn't need to be completely dulled out or anything like that. Whereas with the saddles, that's where you're going to see the age, because that's where the player's hand sits. So you can see here in these middle two, they're real dark. All right, and so that tells me that this guitar, either the saddle's removed or the player's hand sits right there. And so that is something that we want to replicate. So there's some chemical stuff involved in getting that to work, and we'll get to that when we do that part of the video. So that's one thing to note there, is the saddles are where you're going to see the most kind of tarnish. Anywhere that the player's hands, skin touches the guitar, that's where the aging is going to be most noticeable. All right, this is that same guitar, but you got more of a full body shot here. So you can see, once again, when I was talking about that aging down there, I'm gonna have to keep doing this every time apparently. Right here, that's where the arm wear is. Now look right here. Right here, you can see that darkening area there. That's, again, more kind of arm, elbow type contact, but maybe a bit less trafficked in the area that's missing finish. But still really important to note that all the major wear is going to be where the player is contacting the guitar. Because you can see it's much darker here where the oil from someone's skin has gotten to the finish and darkened it up. It's missing finish there. But then if you look over at this other side, over here, it's relatively clean because there's not a whole lot of contact going on with the player there. So important to note. Same thing here. This is going to be, you'll see finish missing in areas like this. That's where the guitar would ride on someone's leg. They're sitting down. So that would be a good area to darken it up some, maybe remove some finish. I would say probably not remove as much finish, because the amount of times that the guitar on the top rides your arm is going to be more than the amount of times the guitar sits on your leg. And also generally, if it's sitting on your leg, you're probably not naked. So it's probably some kind of cloth, jeans, pants, something like that. And that doesn't wear the same way that the oil from someone's skin does. So here's another example. Again, once again, there's that finish kind of in that finish wear, kind of in that same area right there. And you can see that's where the arm rides. So see how the plate is not particularly tarnished. I mean, it looks a little old, but it doesn't look particularly dirty, whereas the saddles are very dirty looking. There's that leg ride, and once again, the plate not super worn down, just not, mirror glossy. Here, if you look on the knobs, you can see, because the knobs have a lot of contact with the player's hands, that little white stripe there is kind of dulled and kind of gotten a brown tint to it where it would have been white originally, so that's something we're going to do. This one has a white pickguard on it, so you can clearly see the white plastic, whatever this is made of, has aged just overall. And that is something that's really kind of a thing that you see with old plastic, is that even if you were to take a pickguard in 1965 and just kind of put it in a box and leave it there until now, the color would look sort of like this, because that's just the way plastic ages naturally, or at least this old plastic, maybe not new plastic. But so you can see that's kind of something we want to do as well, because we have a white pickguard, so we want to kind of yellow it a little bit. And interestingly, you can see there's some spots like here where it's a little bit more white, and I think probably what that is wear from a pick, so that, this is the kind of overall look of the plastic, but where the pick contacts it, it's removing some of that top layer of plastic, and so you're seeing the white plastic underneath that. That's more what the original color of the pickguard would have looked like. Look at that dark fingerboard. That's gorgeous. Very nice. And of course you got some little chips and stuff here. And that's normal to see little tiny chips where somebody set a guitar down or something bumped it. You hit it, your other guitar player on stage, you bump into him or something, you might lose a little chip of finish. You just don't want to get crazy with it. Now here's the back shot of that guitar. Now this, you're seeing a lot more stuff here. Here's all those leg wear marks. And if you look up here, that is kind of what I would, well, actually this whole area here is kind of like buckle rash. So that's kind of like where the guitar would ride on a strap against someone. So you kind of, it works its way up towards here, and that kind of has to do with the way the guitar sits on you and kind of rocks back a little bit. So that's important to note. You also got some finish missing here, and that is going to have to do with the strap being on this part and then coming like that, right? So because the strap comes off the back of the guitar and rides there, so that's what I would call strap wear. Interesting too, you can kind of see in certain areas, like right here is a good example. You can see the wood there, and you can see the red finish there, and then there's that white area. Okay, so that white area is primer. So what they would do with these guitars is they would get the guitar body cut out, sanded, whatever, maybe sealed, possibly. I'm not sure exactly how Fender was doing it at the time. But before they put the paint on, they would put a primer coat on that, and that could be sanded really smooth so that it would accept the top layer of paint and look really nice. So you're going to see when these wear areas, a lot of times it's not just straight color wood. There's going to be a little white transition, right? That shows like wear rather than a finished chip, if that makes sense. This is a different Mustang, but this is a great example of finish checking. Now, checking is where, this is old nitrocellulose finish, because on the old Mustangs, they were using nitro finish on the body and then poly finish on the neck, if I'm not mistaken, in the mid 60s. I think they, later on they just went to full poly everything. But see all these lines? That's basically cracks in the finish. And how that happens is nitrocellulose, unlike polyurethane and some other finishes, it kind of, as it cures, instead of having some flexibility to it, it crystallizes. And so when the wood naturally expands and contracts a little bit, I mean just microscopically so, but enough, from the temperature changes and moisture changes and stuff like that, the finish does not give. So when the wood expands a little bit, the finish cracks, and then when the wood shrinks back down, that crack stays there. And so that's what we're looking at here, is checking. And of course you can see there's some dents and stuff there, but that's kind of a pretty indicative thing about nitrocellulose finish. You can actually do this with some more modern type finishes. In fact, I'm going to show you how to do it with that. We're not going to use polyurethane though, because polyurethane is like really hard to get to look that way. We're going to use an acrylic finish. But you can do the same kind of thing with acrylic finish if you know what you're doing. So we'll do that as well when we get into that part. So this is a very, very relic guitar. This guitar, like, I mean, I'm fairly certain this was done legitimately, not done by someone. I think this is a real vintage guitar. But this guitar was played to death, and you can see it's missing lots of finish. But still, you see those same things that we were talking about before that are kind of indicative of a guitar that's been played in, and that's important to note. So once again, there's that, see the white there? So you can see the primer underneath the paint. Real heavy buckle wear right there. And of course, there's finish sticks to whatever, so there are going to be places where there might just be a speck of finish there. So if you were going to go for a real heavy job, you know, this is a good example. We're not going to do anything quite that heavy, but that's what it looks like. So once again, these necks, these were poly finished necks. So the body was still nitrocellulose, but the neck of the guitar was finished in polyurethane because it's tougher and it's easier to work with overall. But you can see this guitar's neck has been played a lot, whole lot, and so it's got very indicative wear from that. So what you've got, like, kind of in the open chord sort of cowboy area here, is a real darkening. You can see there's like a black tint happening there, and that's just what happens as you play the guitar. The oil from your skin will get into the wood, turn it that color. Even through the finish, it will eventually work its way into the finish. You can see like what almost looks like oil buildup. Like if you've ever seen someone's car they've driven for a really long time and they don't have like something on the steering wheel, and it kind of, you know, it's like a leather thing, it'll collect oil from your hands. That's kind of what that is. We're not going to go quite that far, but this is an interesting example because this neck has been so played in and has, I'm guessing, probably been in some smoky bars and stuff like that, and that's really kind of darkened the tint a lot. But it's not that amber tint. It's like an old look. It doesn't look like the tint was that way originally. You can see some tarnish on the tuners there. There's some little areas where the headstock probably bumped into something. This is interesting. You can see where someone's kind of, this area in between the thumb and the first finger would have continually bumped into that one spot, and it's just black there, just from over and over again from somebody playing an open E chord or something, you know. If you look right here where the logo is, see that edge? Because if I'm not mistaken, I believe what they did on these, like I said, they used a poly finish on the neck, but I think on the front of the headstock they sprayed nitro. And I think that had to do with just making it work with the decal easier. But you'll see on most vintage Fender guitars and reproductions of vintage guitars, you can kind of see the outline of the water slide there. And that's, you know, that's what you're seeing right there. Or right here, and it's where they have the decal, they cut it out, they put it on, they spray enough finish to get it under there, but they don't try and bury it in the clear coat like you see on modern Fenders where you can't feel it or see it at all. It just looks like it's sunk down in there. It didn't look like that on the old one, so that's something to note as well. If you want to do a logo, which we are going to do, then that's how it's going to look. This is a unique example as well, because you're going to see some of that same stuff, but this one has been really well taken care of. Played, but really well taken care of. And so you'll see here the screws are not nearly as tarnished looking because this guitar has been really well taken care of. But once again, there's that kind of black look on the saddles from where the hand of the player sits. So that's important. So that we see that pretty much on every vintage guitar with this kind of, you know, old school steel saddles. You're going to see wearing right through that plating. So we're definitely going to do that. And here's an interesting one. This guitar didn't wear down through the finish completely, but it definitely does have arm wear, and you can see like basically two different tones of finish here. And so kind of what you're seeing there is like, I'm guessing it's one of two things. Either this guitar was finished originally in a color that was kind of off-white like this, which I don't think is the case, and then someone played it through and then to the primer, the white primer. But I think more likely what's happening here is that this guitar was like really a closet queen for a while, and then someone got it out and played it some after it had been that way, and then so they kind of polished off the dirt with their arm, or the, you know, the kind of that top layer of aged finish with their arm. So what you have is like a two-tone kind of look, which is really interesting. And then again, you know, see the metal, the plates, there's some aging, like there's definitely like a kind of a spot there, and that's because there's holes in those bridges, and so right there is an edge where the plating stops, and so that's going to be the area where you see finish start to chip, or plating start to chip away from first, because there's a like a hard edge there. So that would just happen naturally, even if you didn't really, like, you know, do a lot of work with the trim bar or put your hand on it or anything. You can see here the plastic on these old Mustang pickups, because they were completely covered plastic, you didn't see the rods or anything. You can really see how dark that plastic will look just with age and being under a player's hands. You know, it's really interesting. But like I said, the screws and stuff, relatively clean. I mean, look at that strap button. Like, you can still see the shine there. Okay, and here's the last one I think we're gonna look at before we kind of just move on to the next step, which will be a whole other video. This is a neck plate off that guitar. It's got that beautiful checking on it. I guess checking is, whether or not it's beautiful is kind of up to your discretion, but I think it's really cool. But you can see the neck plate, because this is, you know, metal and not finish, it's got wear from riding against someone, but there's still kind of like a gloss around it, and you see, or like a reflectiveness, a shininess, but you see in the center here, it's much more kind of scratched up and gnarly looking in the kind of this area. And that is basically just due to these screws are raised a little bit. So when something contacts this neck plate, it's probably going to contact the screws on the outside, not so much the areas in between them. But like if you had, like, say, you know, you're rubbing against your, you know, shirt that you're wearing, or your coat if you're wearing a coat or something, it's going to contact, these are the areas it's going to contact, is the center and not so much around that. So that's important to note. It wouldn't just be the whole neck plate. It would be the areas where the neck plate makes contact with something. So that's the whole gist of this whole thing with Relic guitars, is that you want to make it believable by making the guitar age in a natural way. Like, this is what you would see. The screw heads are dulled because that's where contact is made. The center of the plate is dulled because that's where contact is made. Okay, so this is, of course, our very inexpensive Bullet Mustang, but it's more or less the same kind of deal as that. These new ones have the contours on them, where the old Mustangs were kind of like a slab body, but you do have the arm contour and the kind of belly cut back here. But other than that, it's a very similar design. The bridge is like a standard hardtail that feeds, oh, I'm sorry, actually it's a top loader. But it doesn't have the trim system or anything like that. But we're gonna age it as if, you know, this is how it would have been originally. This is poly finish on this guitar. So it's not super thick, but it is poly. And poly, in my opinion, does not age in a particularly pleasing way. Like, it doesn't check, it's nigh indestructible unless you just like hit it really hard, in which case it's gonna like crack in weird ways and do like spider webbing and stuff. It just doesn't look as nice, I think, as vintage stuff is. So we're gonna take the finish off of this body and then redo the finish with acrylic paint that will look a bit more on point, I guess, to that. Step one is just kind of learning, observing, taking notes, figuring out approximately what you want to do, and then you have a game plan, and you can kind of use these pictures and things like this as great source material to which, you know, as for what you could base your job off of, your Relic job off of. So I think the next step really is going to be, I mean, besides, you know, just disassemble the guitar, is we're going to do the body first. That's the biggest thing, the biggest kind of, I'm going to say kind of the hardest part really is the body, to get it to look right. So we're going to need to strip the finish off that, which is going to involve a heat gun and a paint scraper. It's pretty easy, honestly. Please subscribe, stick around. This is going to be a fun series of things to do. I'm going to try to kind of get this finished up within, you know, a month or something. It takes a little while in between painting and different things, but I'm going to try to get this done by the end of the year. So anyway, thank you for sticking around. Thanks for watching. I hope this is going to be at least helpful and informative for you, or interesting if you're into this kind of stuff. So until next time, I will catch you later.